A day after delivering one of the greatest performances in professional basketball history, Caitlin Clark was handed a technical foul for doing absolutely nothing wrong. And in that single moment, the entire narrative of the WNBA shifted from celebrating something unprecedented to questioning whether the league had any idea what it was actually doing. On Friday night, she put on a clinic that will be remembered forever. 35 points, 10 assists, 4 steals, 2 blocks in fewer than 30 minutes on the floor. A statistical line so rare that only 4 other players across men's and women's professional basketball had ever assembled anything close to it. And the entire basketball world stopped to watch it happen because this wasn't just a great game. It was history unfolding in real time in Indianapolis. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because this story gets way deeper than one game, and you're going to want to see where it goes. By Saturday, when Indiana took the court against the New York Liberty, the conversation should have still been about Friday's masterclass, about the comparisons to Michael Jordan and Luka Doncic, about what this performance meant for Clark's trajectory and the future of women's basketball. But early in that game, Jonquil Jones threw a forceful screen. Clark went down and looked toward the officials for a whistle, got nothing, got back to her feet, addressed the nearest referee, and was immediately handed a technical foul before the game had even found its rhythm. That single whistle changed everything because it wasn't just a technical. It was her 6th of the season, and 2 more meant an automatic 1-game suspension that could come at any moment. So the celebration from Friday night that was still circulating across every platform got overshadowed by a question that suddenly became impossible to ignore. How does a league move from celebrating history on one night to disciplining the player who made that history less than 24 hours later? And why did it feel like there was something deeper going on than just an isolated bad call? To understand why this moment exploded the way it did, you have to go back to June when Clark received another controversial technical during a game against Phoenix Mercury, a play that spectators and analysts regarded as questionable at best. The kind of emotionally charged moment that officials often let pass without escalating it into a major incident. But this time they didn't rescind it, and when the league reviewed it and decided to keep it on the books, that's when people started paying attention, because other players had seen similar penalties completely removed earlier in the same season, which immediately raised a question that nobody could unsee once it was asked. Fans started pulling video clips and creating side-by-side comparisons, showing other players displaying similar frustration or far more aggressive conduct without receiving the same punishment or scrutiny. And once those comparisons started circulating on social media, the conversation stopped being about Clark's frustration and started being about a pattern that seemed to be emerging. So when she got that 6th technical in July, supporters weren't reacting to one isolated ruling anymore. They were responding to a record they'd been documenting since spring, tracking box scores, archiving clips, saving screenshots, examining every controversial moment against what was increasingly looking like an unmistakable pattern of inconsistency. What made this situation even more significant is that it wasn't just fans making noise online, because Indiana's head coach Stephanie White, who is a professional coach responsible for protecting her players and leading a playoff contender, publicly told reporters that the organization needed conversations about being more strategic in how they managed Clark's technical fouls. And when a coach at that level is forced to make that kind of statement publicly, it means the problem has gone beyond disputed calls and entered territory where playoff positioning and a player's availability are directly connected to officiating decisions. The damage from that June decision went way deeper than just a fine, because it caused a highly attentive fan base to completely withdraw the benefit of the doubt from the league. So from that point forward, every whistle was going to be studied, every ruling was going to be compared against other rulings, and every unexplained difference was going to become another entry in what fans believed was building into an undeniable case of inconsistent treatment. And that's exactly what happened over the following weeks, as the technical count kept climbing. What makes this even more complicated is that Clark is intensely competitive and plays with the kind of emotion that elite basketball requires. But very few athletes in any major sport are expected to manage their emotional responses while simultaneously competing at the highest level, carrying a franchise, facing relentless physical defense, and knowing that every single visible reaction might push a suspension clock closer to 0. And when you combine that pressure with the fact that she's operating in an environment where she's uncertain whether the officiating will be consistent or fair, the entire dynamic becomes something that no player should have to navigate. The contrast between what happened on Friday and what happened on Saturday is so stark that it reveals something fundamental about the league's priorities. Because here was an athlete performing at a generational level during what should have been the most celebratory stretch of her professional career. But instead of basking in that moment, she had to immediately pivot to counting technical fouls and wondering if the next conversation with an official could force her to the bench during a critical playoff push. And that's not the narrative that the WNBA should want surrounding its biggest attraction. Indiana is sitting at 15 wins and 10 losses, fighting for postseason positioning in an increasingly competitive conference, which means every game matters, every possession carries value, and the team's entire strategy assumes Clark will be available to direct an offense that functions most effectively when the ball, the defense, and the pace revolve around her decisions. So the thought of her sitting out even one game due to accumulated technical fouls isn't just a routine disciplinary action. It's a threat to the franchise's entire season that could ripple through everything they've built. The pressure on Clark is arriving from multiple directions at once because you have fans who have assembled a detailed record of the inconsistency, media that has developed a narrative and is getting mainstream coverage, and Clark herself, who has publicly explained her position about the systemic nature of the problem. But what's conspicuously absent from all of that is a genuine response from the league that actually addresses the core issue instead of just issuing more fines and hoping the conversation eventually disappears, which it absolutely will not. Here's what's really troubling about this entire situation. The WNBA has publicly recognized that Clark has accelerated growth in ways that no advertising campaign could ever reproduce, that her presence on any given night is an audience generator, and that suspending her doesn't just cost one basketball game. It removes the league's most dependable attraction at a moment when women's basketball has reached unprecedented levels of mainstream interest. So the question becomes whether the league office has really thought through what a Clarkless game looks like, because that's an active possibility now, not a distant theoretical concern. During fever games, fans are literally monitoring live statistics to track whether the technical foul counter has moved. And every time Clark approaches an official after a call, social media seems to collectively hold its breath waiting to see if another penalty has been issued, which is the kind of constant surveillance that can exhaust even an athlete who refuses to acknowledge it publicly. And it's creating an atmosphere where watching basketball has become as much about monitoring a disciplinary counter as it is about enjoying the sport itself. What remains completely unresolved is whether the WNBA is actually listening to the concerns being raised from the player, the press, and the public, or whether it plans to keep issuing fines while hoping the conversation eventually fades, because the countdown to a potential suspension is still active and growing closer with every game. And once Clark sits out that game, the story won't be about routine discipline. It will be presented as the culmination of a controversy that's been building since spring. And everyone involved knows exactly what that could cost the league in terms of viewership, credibility, and its relationship with the player who has reshaped women's basketball's cultural visibility more than anyone else in history.